Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Undoctrinate Yourself. Today, I'm sitting down once again with the incredible Dr. Jack Kruse. Um, he's been on the podcast at least three times before, maybe more at this point. I don't even remember. But I'm excited to chat with him today because today is April 11th, 2026, and yesterday Alex Jones put out a tweet. I guess taking a clip. Actually haven't watched it yet, but maybe you can enlighten me. But I think it was a clip of you, Jack, talking about the coming pole flip that Becker had talked about back in like the 80s and 90s as being a thing that would be very disruptive to technology and society and all the things and to health and to the next great extinction event potentially as well. And so let's maybe talk about that, start by talking about that because my DMs were like blowing up yesterday. And so I thought we could begin there and then maybe get into some current events and then maybe into some science as well.
Yeah, I mean, the guys came down. They wanted to, they're doing a documentary on MK Ultra, and they wanted to talk to me about the boxes that I found in the basement of Charity Hospital. And I told them, I said, look, I have a Patreon blog that covers that whole event, what I found in there. And we casually started to talk about some of the information that was in that box was tied to, a magnetic declination. And they got really, really interested um, in some of that stuff. And they were like, could we talk about that? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, it's probably not what you guys want to come down here and talk about, but we can do it. So I explained to them that it all began in 1859 with the Carrington event. And prior to that, the Earth's base magnetic field was what it usually is, 50 nanotesla, pretty much in most places. And then we started to talk about what has happened from 1859 and what happened in 1859, which was the Carrington event. I began to explain to them what the global heliocentric current is like, how the sun communicates bidirectionally with the planets. The sun is a cathode ray, the planets are anodes. And when the sun gets some information about the magnetic dynamo, um, what it's paying attention to is the wobble, the precession of the planet. What usually happens as the magnetic shield of a planet begins to weaken, it does get a slight wobble from the stuff that's inside the planet, and the sun usually responds with a coronal mass ejection directed at that planet. The goal there is not to destroy the planet. The goal there is actually to stop the wobble. In other words, to get the dynamo, the vortex inside the planet, to become operational. Um, and then we started to talk about what happened to Mars 4 billion years ago. And I explained to them that the largest volcano in the solar system is on Mars, but the magnetic dynamo in Mars has been dead for 4 billion years. And if you look at the equator of Mars, Valles Marineris is there. It's an electric scar that's larger than the United States on the equator, where Mars got hit with a very large CME. And what does large CME versus the Carrington event really mean? It's actually tied to the magnetic dynamo in the planet. So back 4 billion years ago, this was obviously a huge problem for Mars. It gets popped. And what do we know about Mars? It's never recovered from that event. It's a dead red desert. There's no life on Mars. The only water that's remaining is at the poles, and it's very small. But the key thing is there's no magnetic field. There's also no ionosphere. It's been stripped. Um, and I went to explain to some of these guys that if you take a look at our planet, we have places called Mars on Earth. They're called deserts. And deserts have a lower magnetic field. And I explained to them that the dynamo in the planet, has been moving for 4.6 billion years, but our dynamo, compared to a place like Mars, has been much more stable. That's why it's actually supported life. And then I started to point out some very interesting things that happen with the dynamo. Like I've been talking about melanin and heme evolution on the Patreon blogs, but one of the things that was really important for these guys to hear is that back in the GOE, when life was beginning in the first two domains, the magnetic field on Earth was much weaker than it is today. We know that from magnetic hysteresis from sediments, around the planet. And then I pointed out to them probably the key planetary study that we've known. I've known about this for about 30 years, but there was never any paper out to prove the linkage. A lot of people in the EMF world were talking about how EMF links with oxygen resonance, but I don't think what people really understand is that magnetic flux links directly to oxygenation on a planet. Okay.
Mm.
So the link in physics that's now been made, I put it out on both my forum and also gave it to the guys who interviewed me. Since the Cambrian explosion, the Earth has been magnetically locked to oxygen. And this should make sense to people who follow my work. Why? Because oxygen is paramagnetic. It's the only paramagnetic gas on the periodic table. So the fact that the magnetic dynamo is coupled to oxygen should be no surprise. The big surprise on Earth is that it was not magnetically coupled in the GOE. Why? Because there was no oxygen on Earth then. That's what the GOE stands for.
Mm-hmm.
And we created the oxygen because of these little cyanobacteria that made DHA. And this is fundamentally why DHA is also a liquid magnetic fat. And it's one that mammals really are linked to. But when I told them that now physics has this paper out that shows for 540 million years on Earth, the magnetic dynamo is completely coupled with oxygenation. Now, why is this important? Because all 5 extinction events are also show a big time coupling to this issue. So anytime the magnetic dynamo loses its flux, life wobbles. Just like the planet wobbles, so does life. And it turns out the things on the planet that tend to survive these extinction events, all different, are different mechanisms that are tied into it. So, for example, I spent a lot of time with those guys, 4.5 hours actually, discussing the Permian extinction, which was the biggest one on the planet, where 96% of things died. And I explained to them that that extinction is exactly the opposite of the one that we're currently in now, that up in Siberia, where the magnetic field today is really strong, it was extremely weak. And these volcanoes eventually opened up, egressed all of their magma, and that led to the Permian extinction. What happened there? Oxygen levels in the oceans plummeted, meaning anything that was in the ocean was wiped out. Only 4% of creatures made it through. But as I told those guys, and I told Marty Bent yesterday, we're here talking today on a podcast as proof that, life still found a way, because without that, we wouldn't get through it. So the thing that is kind of interesting now is that the latest USGS service just came out, and a lot of the data was tied to the swarm data, which are 3 satellites that are up in space that have showed something that no one expected. When I wrote my quilt document in 2005, I was using the USGS data back then of where the Earth's magnetic field was. And I compared it to the 2026 data that just came out. And when I tell you that the change is substantial, it's even worse than I thought was possible. Why? Because Siberia has now 335 nanotesla magnetic field. Remember what I said earlier? Base all over the Earth is 50 nanotesla. So this is a radical increase. So when I looked at the papers, looked at some of the space data from Swarm, I started to do some calculations based on this link in the physics data between the magnetic dynamo and oxygen. And this goes all the way back to 320 million years ago. And the planet hasn't had that strong a magnetic field in a long time. But you know what's interesting? Guess what evolved 320 million years ago? I should say mammals. That was the first time they evolved on the planet. And the magnetic field at that time became extremely strong. We know that from magnetic hysteresis.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're in a situation where there's parts of the Earth that have extremely low magnetic declination. So, for example, for the last 50 years, everybody has finally realized that the Carrington event is tied to this whole thing. Why? If you look at pictures like that I've put out, that NASA's put out, they show the magnetic North Pole from like 1590 all the way to today. And one of the things that you notice is that the magnetic North Pole has left Canada and is now in Siberia.
Yes.
And the crazy part is, just in the last year, it moved 20 kilometers, which, when you look at the long history of the Earth, this doesn't make any sense. We don't have any data that says the magnetic field can move that much. Now, remember, we only go back about 125 years being able to measure this stuff. So it's not like we have, a Library of Alexandria to say, hey, this is really anomalous. But this is the data we do have. So, people have famously asked me, and you are actually one of them, why have I taken 2 world cruises in the last 2 to 3 years? Well, something happened in May of 2024 that got my antenna up. And what was that thing that happened? I was sitting here in El Salvador and noticing that there was a lot more earthquakes. So I started to look at some of the swarm data, and the swarm data showed something that I didn't expect, that the South Atlantic anomaly was almost doubled in size, and it was beginning to fracture into another piece, and that piece was headed towards the tip of Africa. And when I thought about it, I said, that means the magnetic field in the Southern Ocean is extremely weak. It means that it's so weak that the Van Allen radiation belts are coming closer to Earth, and that means more deuterium and tritium are getting into the Southern Ocean. And if you know anything about biology, this is a really bad problem. Why? Because the base chain of all life is called DNA and RNA. And what controls epigenetics is something called the methyl group. Methyl group has 3 hydrogens. If you get deuterium and tritium on methyl groups, you basically change the phenotype of all species of animals. That's actually what all Maha diseases are. They're actually changes in the deuteration rate or tritium rate. Tritium is really bad news, and that's the one I was worried about, because on a lot of podcasts, I always tell people, we don't have to worry about tritium because our magnetic shield gets rid of it. Well, it turns out we got to worry about it now, because in the Southern Hemisphere, it's getting through. So why did I take the cruises? Pretty simple. I was looking for evidence that this problem was there. And what gave me the impetus? In May of 24, while I was looking at the earthquakes happening here in Guatemala and the volcanoes blowing up, you can go back and look at my tweets about this because they're there. I said something must be going on in the Southern Ocean. And literally the day after our biggest eruption here in Guatemala, which is about 120 miles from me, we had a 5.5 earthquake. And then there was reports that the northern aurora had come down to 18 north latitude and covered Puerto Rico.
I heard about that.
And at the same time, the southern aurora came all the way up to northern Brazil, which fucking blew my mind.
Wow.
And I'm going, wait a minute. That puts it around 12, 11 south. I mean, that's above Lima, Peru. I mean, that's equatorial tropic areas. Like, that shouldn't happen. And that is when I put my sleuth hat on. So what did I do? I went all over the world looking for evidence of significant magnetic declination. Why? Because our government doesn't allow us to have this data too frequently. We get it very infrequently. Uh, the European space authorities, they do a better job because they have these swarm satellites. But during that time, I was blocked from getting the information. I subsequently fixed that problem because I have a couple of friends in the know, uh, tied to both DARPA and NASA. And I said, look, I really need to get this data. And what did I do? I went and looked at birds, bees, um, and one other animal specifically, a certain type of fish that were magnetically sensitive. And my question was, were these animals dropping dead? Were they having problems? Were there evidence of fish dyes? Were any of the fish dyes linked to beta decay in the fish? And then I started to talk to the people in the fishing community in Australia. And that's when I found out that over the last 10 years, their fishing industry is no longer wild. It's almost all farmed. Um, and they very rarely see any wild fish because the oceans are dead. And I was like, okay, now we're getting somewhere.
And like the mainstream narrative on bees is that it's like pesticides and EMF that we're creating that is causing the issue. But would you
Oh,
say that it's mostly
but guess what? That is all true, but here's
okay?
what you don't understand. The base case, like the 90% reason it's happening is because the magnetic field is collapsing.
Right.
And when you understand that birds, navigate using cryptochrome in their eye through the pectin oculi, you have to remember there's a couple of really unique birds. One is called the godwit, the other one is an albatross. And the godwit is the one that I just wrote a blog about. And I think people now are beginning to understand why I did, because there's a bird that goes from north to south. And the godwit has a very special pectin oculi, tied to how it handles some of the vortexes using melanin. And it leaves the Aleutian Islands and flies all the way across the equator and goes down to New Zealand. And that's 11,000-kilometer flight. It does it in 12 days and it never rests, it never
Wow.
sleeps. So the reason I went to look for this bird is because I wanted to see if there was evidence that the godwit bird wasn't making it to New Zealand now that this has been a problem, because we know the path of this bird. And there is record reports of godwits dying in the ocean.
Wow.
And that is what I found when I left Peru and went all the way to New Zealand and then to Australia. Then my question was about the fish. And the last question was about the bees. I wanted to know specifically what the effect in Peru, the South Pacific, New Zealand, and Australia was about the bees and the honey. And, down in New Zealand and Australia, it was very, very interesting. There was, they're very famous in New Zealand for using Mucuna honey, and it's got a lot of healing properties, royal jelly, and things like that. One of the things that I found is the South Pacific and the people on the western coast of um, Australia noticed beehive collapse. Australia, it was completely gone, just like the fish. But New Zealand still had a spike. And the thing that I found was that the spike, most of the bees were doing really well, but on the southern island of New Zealand. So I started to put this all together and I started to realize in 24 that the data was substantially changed way more than what I thought. And I was using things on the top of the planet. So when I got home, I took another trip. And that trip, I told people on Twitter was to go see a Maya Parabu on Suriname, but it really wasn't. I wanted to go to the top of South America to find out what was happening on the top of the South Atlantic anomaly. So I left from Panama and went all the way to Brazil on that trip. And I asked the same questions that I asked in the Southern Pacific Ocean, because now I was on top of the SAA. And I found that the information was that birds were falling out of the sky and
Hmm.
dying in Suriname, British Guyana, parts of the Amazon rainforest, um, The big one was in Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao. There was also issues there as well. And I thought to myself, this is really bizarre because the SAAs really, really low down on South America. I just couldn't make it didn't make sense to me, kind of what I was finding. And then about 2 weeks ago, the data came in from USGS and the swarm data, and it shows that the South Atlantic anomaly is now not only doubled in size, it's almost 3 times the size of continental Europe, and it's beginning to split. And the split has another wave that's now hitting the southern coast of Africa. As soon as I saw that, I started to put my epidemiologic hat on and started to look for evidence in us, the penultimate mammal. So, what did I know would be the big effect in the human system? Since mammals all innovated in high magnetic environments, that means that they're very oxygen sensitive. We're the most oxygen sensitive because we have this thing called the brain that's only 2% of our weight, that takes 20% of our cardiac output to generate vortexes. And the magnetic vortex is a big deal. So in the human GPS system, which we can talk about, the x-axis is the sphenoid bone, the y-axis is the notochord, and the z-axis that comes out is your heart. It's out in space. And your heart acts as a gravity well for heavy isotopes. That's the reason why people have found, when they look, that deuterium is 150 parts per million in our blood. And the other thing you may not know, through evolutionary history, Cambrian to now, evolution went from one-chamber hearts in fish, then went to two-chamber hearts in amphibians, then went to four-chamber hearts in us. Why? What was the case? As we got more complex, you vortex more blood through a chamber. And the human heart is really interesting because of the trabecula that are present in it. Really creates a big-time vortex. And what does the vortex designed to do? To enter the circulatory system, and this pushes all the deuterium out to where the endothelium is. The middle part, which we call laminar flow in biology, is where all the H plus is. And that is the H plus that gets to mitochondria. Why? Because mitochondria need oxygen. Most of the red cells that are in there are carrying that oxygen, paramagnetically and dropping it off. But the key that people don't realize, if blood didn't vortex and deuterium got in, it would be a problem. This is one of the fundamental things that biology doesn't understand. This is the reason why human adult red blood cells do not have nuclei. If it had nuclei, it would have mitochondria. If it had mitochondria, that the viscosity of the blood, the dielectric constant of the blood, would fall to 78. We're designed to have a very high dielectric. Why? Because that creates vortexes. So what are the 3 vortexes that are important for humans? ATPase, number one. We just talked about the delivery of oxygen. What's the number that everybody should know at this point? If you've listened to anything I've said, 9,000 revolutions per second of H plus. That's what the ATPase does. That creates a vortex. What's the second vortex? This one I spent a lot of time talking about over 10 years ago with my members. I haven't talked too much about it, but this is the vortex that I'm real expert in because it's in my organ, the brain. The brain creates a vortex in the thalamus. How is the vortex created? We have 2 lateral ventricles, a third ventricle that looks like a torpedo, aqueductus sylvius, and then the fourth ventricle that looks like a wine decanter. So if you've ever drank wine, especially with me, you'll know that I vortex the wine. Why do I vortex the wine? People will tell you in the wine business, oh, it opens the wine. No, it's an isotopic fractionation. Why? Because you're pushing all the bad stuff out to get the good stuff when you taste it. And what happens is your lateral ventricles are not part of the vortex system. And this is one of the really key things that I think people who are influencers and not scientists have really fucked up in this world. They don't understand how you go from vortexing in blood to vortexing in the brain. And it turns out there's a organ in humans called the choroid plexus in the brain. And the choroid plexus has massive amounts of melanin in it, kind of like the pectin oculi in birds, to do the same thing. And what happens there is you are fractionating deuterium from the blood to knock it down to increase the dielectric. That's what the choroid plexus job is. And the two lateral ventricles act like fuel tanks for lighter hydrogen. It goes through the aperture into the third ventricle, where it's located in the front of the head, right above the optic chiasm, and then it goes directly posterior through the aqueduct into this fourth ventricle chamber. Well, the aqueductus sylvius is the key to the vortex. Why? Because you have this huge third ventricle, small fourth. What does it do? It creates the Venturi effect. The Venturi effect, vortexes, CSF to further fractionate it. Okay? Why is this important? What sits on the floor of the fourth ventricle? Remember what my day job is, Alexis. I'm a brain surgeon. I know a lot about neuroanatomy. What sits right on the floor of the fourth ventricle is the vagus motor trigone. So you're designed to get H plus hitting that trigone because that is the exhaust in the gut that links to the stomach and the pancreas to get rid of deuterium. Okay? What else is in the fourth ventricle that's important for people to know? The foramen of Magendie is the center port that allows you to go through the vagal motor trigone but into the spinal cord. But what's out lateral? It's called the foramen of Luschka. And Luschka dumps out into the CP angle where cranial nerve 5 through 12 are. That's where the deuterium designed to go. It goes on the top of the head and usually exits at the arachnoid granulations. Do we have a backup system to get rid of deuterium from the CP angle? We do. It's called Meckel's cave. Meckel's cave is where the trigeminal nerve sits. All three branches are there. V1, V2, and V3. So how do we get this whole GPS system to work? Well, it's pretty simple. When you understand the sphenoid bone is the x-axis, why is the sphenoid and what does it do? At the apex, the big butterfly wing of it is embedded the middle meningeal artery. Okay? That's a branch of the external carotid. What penetrates the sphenoid bone in the middle? The internal carotid artery. What sits at the junction of the X and Y axis? The basilar artery. Those are all the three arteries that fill your head. Why do you have to know something about the basilar? The basilar meets at a bone called the occipital bone and the clivus. The clivus is the remnant of the notochord that's left in humans. Okay? So this tells you that the sphenoid bone is getting all this information about deuterium right there. It also has some other interesting things associated with it. What? The pituitary gland sits in the captain's chair of the sphenoid bone. So what else should you know about this GPS system? It's penetrated by two cranial nerves, cranial nerve 2 and cranial nerve 5. Cranial nerve 2 is all the light information that I've talked about ad nauseum to everybody. But cranial nerve 5 is actually allows the mechanical and vibration sense of this system that works with Meckel's cave. Why? Because our face is designed to be collapsed, and it articulates when we chew at the sphenoid bone where Meckel's cave is to allow us to deuterium deplete. Why is this important? Because it turns out, if you go back in evolutionary history, and you know this, the two domains of life that started this out are archaea and bacteria. What's the main difference between those two, between deuterium and bacteria? It's pretty simple. Bacteria don't like deuterium and archaea can handle it. So then you got to ask yourself, okay, we have this endosymbiosis event where the two are joined. So that means since we are eukaryotes, there has to be some archaean remnants in us. What are the archaean remnants in us that allowed us to shake, rattle, and roll to get rid of deuterium? Well, it's pretty simple. Archaea have a different cell membrane structure and a cell wall structure that's rigid compared to bacteria. So when they were in the ancient GOE oceans, the waves would knock the deuterium out of them. What's the remnant in us? Our bones, our facial structure. Where's the deuterium kept? In the gravity well of the heart. Why? That's why the heart muscle, when you unfold it, looks like a helix. What's the key though? is what's inside the ventricles and the atrium, because it vortexes the blood even more. Okay, so you have almost like a jet exhaust. That's how you should be thinking of the heart. But the heart's vortex keeps deuterium in the blood and doesn't let it go to tissues that have mitochondria. In the brain, the key place they meet is the choroid plexus. But what's another place that is open that nobody ever talks about except probably me? We have circumventricular organs that have no blood-brain barrier. So that is how the thalamic GPS system knows what the isotopic load of the body is and what is it trying to do. It's trying to use this GPS system, the 3 coordinates, to figure out how to coordinate things in the body with circadian biology. So when you understand that the thalamus is where this ventricular vortex is in, what's special about the thalamus? It's where all sensory input for humans comes in. Every single part, with the exception of one sense, doesn't come directly in. That one sense is olfaction. Why? Because that's part of the old paleocortex. We have a different program for that. But the thalamus is a huge array. What else is unique about the thalamus? Thalamus has humongous cholesterol and DHA in it. Not as much as the eye does, but the central retinal pathway into the thalamus has more DHA than any other part of the body. So it tells you magnetic flux between the eye and the thalamus is huge. What else is important? The eye gives 48% of the neurons that radiate out in the optic radiations, which surround the ventricular system. Okay? So you're getting pretty good information here that light and magnetic flux are a big deal for the interior part of the brain. So what does the GPS system in humans specifically do? It connects us with the earth, the sun, and the moon. That is how the system works. So when the magnetic dynamo has a problem, how is it coupled? How is our bodies coupling to it? Well, it turns out, where did DHA come from? Everybody knows cyanobacteria in the oceans. That's when oxygen came. That's when the great oxygenation event happened. So what does that tell you? Oxygen levels in water changed. The oxygen levels in water then changed the magnetic dynamo. That is the reason why the dynamo got coupled at the Cambrian explosion. Why? Because prior to the Cambrian explosion, there was no oxygen in the ocean. And what did that do? It changed the magnetic flux by changing the isotopic fraction. And guess what happens? When the isotopic fraction in water changes, the magnetic dynamo reacts to it, which is why I need to pay attention to what was going on in the Southern Ocean. Because what I just laid out to you, this is called the human librarian, tells us how we work. So after doing this big deep dive in this whole discussion that I'm having with you to kind of educate you on why this is important, I did the final thing. I went and looked at humans in Brazil. I went and looked at humans in Africa where the SAA was. And guess what I found? They were all getting heart disease and neurodegeneration. So guess what? Bees, birds, fish, and the penultimate mammals on the planet in the Southern Hemisphere are dying. And they're dying at record rates. And it's not arguable anymore. And when you understand what this means, it means the gravity well of the Earth, its z-axis is failing. So what is the big ticket that I did? You happen to know. I'm wearing it right now. See? What does that say? Antarctica, South Pole. So why did I go there? Everybody asked me. I was looking for evidence that we were emitting excessive radio frequency light out of the southern pole. We know it's not coming out of the northern pole, but we know it could come out of the southern pole if we have a magnetic failure. So what did we find? We found that we have unbelievable degassing of RF coming out of the bottom of the planet. You know why that's a big problem? because RF radiation destroys melanin. So that means whales, Weddell seals, and penguins should be affected down there. So what did I ask the biologists that were on the cruise ship with me? I asked them the same question about fish, bees, and birds, and I got the same answer. So I knew by using all these physics deductions, by using first principle thinking, because our government's fucking lying to us, that the real story on the planet is that magnetic declination has increased tremendously on Earth. And it's happened unbelievably over the last 50 years. But the proof, the external proof, I gave you the biology side, but the real proof is how fast the magnetic North Pole ran from Canada to Siberia. And what does this mean now? Because I've explained the three vortexes in biology. What's the vortex in the planet you need to pay attention to? The vortex in the planet right now is in Siberia. It's uber strong. It's 335 nanotesla. This is spinning all the light isotopes. Why should this make sense to you? What do you know that's happening at the same time all this has been going on? All the water, the ice at the poles melted. What do I always tell people about water? The best water is at the poles, right?
Because it's deuterium depleted and has a different
Got
melting
it.
point.
So guess what? Now all that deuterium depleted water is going in the Arctic Ocean, and that magnetic flux is creating a massive vortex in Siberia. So what is the mid-suture line on planet Earth? Just like a neurosurgeon would think, that's called Iceland, right down the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Where's the blocked vagal exhaust? It's happening in the South Atlantic anomaly. That mimics what's supposed to happen in us. And there's nothing coming out. So when I realized how these things were all connected in 2024, I asked my geology friends, how geologically active is the Pacific Ring of Fire? And what I found out, there's this really big disconnect between Panama and 2/3 of Chile. And these are all places that I went to. But I just never said anything to anybody because I wanted to make sure before I had this right, I really had it right. And the Pacific Ring of Fire above Panama is kicking ass, taking names. And below it, at the southern tip of South America, like where Ushuaia is, Tierra del Fuego, it's also doing well. But there's a dead zone from probably, I'd say maybe 1,000 kilometers south of Santiago, all the way up to Panama. And it extends across all the way, the whole top of South America. And now the bleeding edge of SAA is in the Caribbean, and it's affecting all the way up until Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico now stands at the western edge, western northern edge. So this is no longer a South Atlantic anomaly. The anomaly is growing. So what does that mean for people who, are my clients? You know that I have a duty to tell people where I think the best place to go is to keep the vortexes in you running. But we already have pretty good data that South America is not the place to go. Okay? But now I can say with some firmness that the Caribbean on top of South America is a no-go zone. And I believe most of the islands in the Caribbean out deep in the Atlantic Ocean, like Puerto Rico, Turks and Caicos, all that, out, not interested. It appears the South American continent will block the Ring of Fire. The best place right now in the world to be is Siberia, but unfortunately there is no UV light there. Yeah. So you can't grow a lot of food. But Iceland, for the last 12 years, has been blowing its top like crazy. So believe it or not, here's a doctor that's made his living telling people the tropics are where you want to go. But guess what? The best bailout right now is for people in Northern Europe. It's fucking Iceland. Because the magnetic flux and the sun is good enough for you not to have a big problem there. Do I think the east coast of Africa is in deep trouble? Yes. I think this is a place I would not be caught dead in over the next 50 to 100 years. Why? Because I believe all the sea life is going to die all the way up the western coast, all the way to the beginnings of the Sahara Desert. The real problem is at the tip of Africa, there's a thing called the big iron blob. And for those people who have listened to me, they probably haven't done deep enough dives in geology like I do, but my members know about this blob because I've talked to them about it. And this blob is a big piece of iron that's blocking the SASA. But once it gets around this, which is going to happen probably this year, guess what's right in its path? Australia. And Australia, based on the newest data, has some of the worst magnetic metrics you've ever seen. And that's the reason why the fish, the birds, and the bees have been dying there for 50 years. It's also the reason why the Great Barrier Reef is in trouble since 73. So what are we seeing? There's not a lot of landmass in the Southern Ocean, but just about everything in the Southern Ocean is being taken out. So we have the reverse effect of what happened in the Permian extinction. And the exhaust in the Permian was Siberia. Now the magnetic intake, the jet engine, is in Siberia. So this is clearly an evidence of a pole shift. And where this ties to Becker's work is when he talked about polarity shifts, remember where he did it. He did it when he was studying amputations in salamanders, and he found that in sleep, the DC electric current went away, and that current of healing was gone. And it was because of a magnetic polarity shift in the brain. What does that correlate to that I just explained to you in a pretty decent and detailed way? That's the position of the vortex going north and south in the axis. What controls that, Alexis? The ependema has cilia that beat. That controls which way the vortex goes. What's the link there between melanin and POMC and the MITF AMPAR system that controls all this? Those are called tanocytes. Tanocytes are loaded with melanin, and they line the human central nervous system ventricular cavity. And these cells become really important because there are magnetically sensitive cells. They tell us when the vortex needs to go certain ways. And, I famously did a podcast. I shouldn't say it was a podcast. It was a webinar probably 15 years ago. And I told my members I was taking an epidermoid tumor out in the brain. I was called by one of my staff members in LSU to do the case with him. And the reason he asked me to do it is because I used to be an oral surgery resident. So I was pretty good about disarticulating the face and the skull to get into places that are not easy to get into in the brain. And we did a transcallosal approach, went through the top of the head, split the corpus callosum to get into the third ventricle to remove the medial portion of the tumor. And we started the case around 1:00 in the afternoon in New Orleans. And because this was a private patient, I gave the patient back to my my mentor at that time, who's supposedly teaching me, which I chuckle at to this day. And he gets in the operating microscope and starts to remove the tumor. But when he's in there, I'm looking on the resonant port, and I'm designed to be the 6 other eyes that he can't see while he's focused on doing what he's doing, so that he doesn't get into trouble. And I noticed that the ventricular fluid was going from the frontal pole to the occipital pole. And I'm going, that's fucking wild. And I said to him, I said, are you seeing what I'm seeing? And he goes, what are you talking about? And I said, back out of the scope for a minute. I said, look at the ventricular system. Because, we had the whole thing open. You're seeing the whole top of the third ventricle. I said, look at it. It's moving. There's waves going towards the aqueduct. And he just thought, yeah, okay, he could care less because he wanted to get the tumor out. So he goes back to work, and the sun sets. We're now getting ready to close the case up. And I'm looking in the scope again. Now the vortex is going the opposite way. And I'm sitting there and I'm going, I said, will you look at this again? Now it's going the opposite way. And he gave me some bullshit reason that this was tied to anesthesia or this and that. I'm like, no way. I said, the patient was asleep before when the vortex was going the other way. This wasn't anesthesia. And he just wasn't interested. Of course, I got interested. And that's when I learned about ependymocels and tanocytes and kind of what they do, and that they're big time linked into this MITF AMPAR loop that's tied to both circadian biology and also leptin, the leptin melanocortin pathway. And I was like, okay, this begins to make sense. And then I started to realize this ties directly to what Becker found when he put the salamanders on the 2000 Gauss magnet, that he was changing the polarity, the vortex in the amphibian brain. And that's why he was able to let them go to sleep. And the reason I discuss all this with you is because you need to understand that a magnetic vortex is another way that mammals get cheap energy for free. And it turns out that we are the animals on the planet that use the vortex probably more than anybody else. I explained to you already what happened in amphibians. They only had 2 chambered hearts, and fish only have 1 chambered hearts. So think about what I said to you when I went in the Southern Ocean. Should it be surprising to you that fish died before us? No, because the vortex, if they only have 1 chamber, they're heavily reliant on that. If it gets taken away, they're going to die first. Birds, who are the other animal that got through the last extinction event, their vortex is very different. Their vortex starts in the eye. Their pecten oculi looks like a fish gill with all melanin striations. But what's their exhaust? They are truly a jet engine. Their glucagon exhaust in their gut works so fast. And this will make you realize why I also scoff at food gurus. Do you know that every bird on Earth is insulin resistant by definition? Because they have to be. Because they are isotopically deuterating themselves through the glucagon pathway so that they can do things that no other animal can do. And they're flying to do this. They can actually see the magnetic field. So they should be able to see where to go. And remember, the KT event was not an extinction that knocked the magnetic field out. It was an exterior problem that blocked us from the sun. The magnetic field was still there. That's the reason why birds survived. They were able to use the magnetic field to go and find where photosynthesis was still working. Okay? Mammals survived because they used their vortexes, being underground, to create fat from light, specifically blue light, okay? Which was dominant after the asteroid hit. But the magnetic field was not a big player in the last extinction event. It appears that what's going on now on Earth, it's not a new phenomenon. I don't want anybody to think that it is, because this has happened at least 500 times in Earth's history. The key thing that we will not know, but I do know that everybody's following it, is we don't have a Library of Alexandria to know how severe this event really is going on in the Southern Hemisphere. We also don't understand how this ties into coronal mass ejections. But if you look at what governments are doing now, some of the things that we are all scratching our head begin to start to make some sense now. Because you start going, so maybe that's the reason why this is going on. And they're not telling us about this, because if they told us, you'd have 8 billion people on the planet running to the places that are the oasis, that the swarm satellites are telling us, hey, things are good here. Now, in your world, in my world, why is this new data a big deal? So you probably have figured out from the discussion we had about the link between 540 million years ago, magnetic inclination and the sun, that's how we sculpt haplotypes. Haplotypes are paying attention to all this. So how should you be thinking about a haplotype now? It's basically a GPS system for the matrix in your body. But it turns out the matrix in your head, or the GPS in your head, has to coordinate with that matrix and haplotype in you. What does a magnetic declination event mean, given the way the human librarian is constructed? It means haplotypes no longer matter. How's that for a shock? So your haplotype can get you in trouble if you live in a magnetically declined place. So this gets back to the question you asked me earlier. So is this why the bee thing is a big deal around pesticides and non-native EMF cities? Yeah, because guess what? Magnetic declination mimics. It mimics glyphosate in the food supply. It mimics non-native EMF's ability to take deuterium out of your blood and put it where mitochondria are. But is that effect the big effect? No, it's the facade of the bigger problem going on inside the earth. Why is this the case? We are seeing evidence of Maha disease in places where the magnetic field is failing now. Because now that we have new data maps, we can now look at zip codes and go, so that's the reason why people were dying, from this here. So, for example, let's take probably the most controversial thing is COVID, because that was the last big effect. Do we now understand why people died the way they did? If you put a magnetic declination map over where COVID deaths happen, you're going to be stunned how coincident they are. They match almost perfectly. So what's the game now? What is the real game for true mitochondrial biophysic people that are listening carefully to what I'm telling you? Your goal is to live in a place where magnetic inclination is happening. And if you think that latitudes and tropics determine this, you're wrong. Okay? And I've known this was coming for a long time. I just didn't know it was going to change on a dime, because in the 20 years that I've been teaching this science, I'll be the first one to admit this. I didn't think in a million years that Siberia would go from 50 nanotesla to 335 in 320 million years. It happened in 20 fucking years. There is nothing precedented for that in the geologic record, the physics record, astrobiology, nothing on Earth. We just don't know what the slope of that line is. And it turns out the slope of that line is now asymptotic. So that means the way I teach has to be adapted to this new data. So it turns out we have something new called the volcano protocol. Turns out volcanoes are a really good place to be. So to show people that I've been paying attention to this for 20 years, now I've told the members on my site, I said, do you understand the choice that I had to make 5 years ago? Was I going to the Chicxulub crater in Mexico, or should I go to El Salvador? And I will tell you what the decision tree was for me. The decision tree was the Chicxulub crater was the last site of the last extinction event. It's where the asteroid hit the planet. What was the things that were pro for this area for me? 30 kilometers of the crust were blown off. That means we're closer to the Dynamo, okay? The base of the crater also has a volcano in it. The Gulf of Mexico is fucking teeming with life, okay? Which also is unusual because it is a tropical area. It should be a desert for life because it has less oxygen in the water when it's warm. But the exact opposite was there. But then I kept looking what was going on in the surface with the Mexican government, the Mexican people. I didn't see things going higher. One of the other things that was a positive for Mexico, the cenote system there, because where the asteroid hit was made out of karst. Karst normally deuterium depletes rainwater. For 65 million years, the rain came down in this area of Mexico. All the cenote system is deuterium depleted. I'm like, this has got to be the place. But the thing that stopped me was the politics, and the people there were not thriving. And I said, there was an intuition in me, just stop me. And I said, I just don't know if this is the right place to go. And then what magically happens? I go and look to places relatively close around there. And then I find the land of volcanoes where they have more volcanoes per kilometer square mile than any other place on earth. And that's called El Salvador. And I see this guy, Bukele, and he's getting rid of his atomic mass called MS-13. He's giving Bitcoin to people. The people there are all smiling. They look radically different than what's going on in Mexico. So what do I decide to do? 5 years ago, my intuition that magnetic inclination was higher in El Salvador than Mexico. And I jumped. And I'd be honest with you, I was not sure if I was right. I can say to you today, that was the best decision of my life. Why? Because right now, things of higher latitude than the Chicxulub crater. Remember, Chicxulub is 20 north. Puerto Rico is 18 north. Puerto Rico is fast becoming, how shall I say this calmly? A dementia ward for humans. And it's not a good place to be. And it does appear that the continent of South America is going to deflect most of what's left towards Africa and then towards Australia. There's no evidence outside of the southern northern Atlantic Ocean that this is getting bigger. It looks like it's going towards Africa. This is going to have huge impacts for both Africa, the southern Indian Ocean, probably the tip of India. Do I believe Australia all the way up into the South China Sea is going to be impacted? Yes. One of the other things I found out from the swarm data that stunned me, the best bailout for Australia is Philippines and New Zealand, the southern island. So what am I telling you now? The southern island, not the northern island that's got a better latitude. So Philippines, I normally would not have told people to go to. Why? Because it's got too many people, too much non-native EMF from all those people. But the magnetic field that's there compared to other places around is off the chain. And remember, that's technically where the Pacific Rim of fire starts and then goes up to Japan, comes through Alaska, and goes all the way down. What else did I find out about the map? I found out that the southern and northern islands of Japan, excellent. Not a bad place to be. This is the most shocking revelation. The best place to be in North America is the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. Continental United States is absolutely horrendous. The only state that may be okay is Washington State because the Pacific Rim is still volcanically active underneath it. But when you go from Oregon all the way down to Guatemala, you hit a dead zone. It's almost like it's Mars based on the data. And that explains the reason why California has no living fish in their Pacific Ocean. It's also concerning that Western Mexico is also, it used to be a fishing mecca. I went there on my world cruise too, through the whole place, talked to all the fishermen. Fish are, when people from California come down to go fishing, they normally used to catch tuna all the time. Now they catch fish like this big. Most of the fishing is done further south. Where's the fishing spectacular? Guatemala, El Salvador, Costa Rica, and Nicaragua. Then Panama slacks off. I do think Panama slacks off because of the canal traffic, but then it's a veritable dead zone from Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, all the way in northern Chile until you get past Santiago. Like the Pacific Rim is the blocked vagal exhaust for the planet. And that exhaust needs to open up for things to go. So do I think eventually what will happen to get the magnetic dynamo back? The key sign will be when we start to see huge eruptions and earthquakes begin to happen in Chile. in Peru, in Ecuador. Why? Because that needs to happen again. It may even happen in the ocean. We may not see it. I guess the other place I should talk about, based on the data that's important, is Hawaii. Normally, people would think Hawaii is a great place. Believe it or not, the magnetic declination that's happened on the Big Island is pretty substantial. The only place that's still pretty active is Kilauea. Mauna Kea and Mauna Loa are dead. They're also encumbered big time by military radar. So as far as I'm concerned, Hawaii is still a no-go. There's other better choices in the Southern Pacific if you're going to do that. But Hawaii is not part of the volcano protocol. And I think that explains kind of what I've been doing the last 2, 3, 4 years. Then it should make sense based on what I'm teaching people, because now we also know that RF is pouring out of the southern hemisphere because it's blocked. Why? Because that's the entropy dump of the Earth from the magnetic flux it's losing. That's exactly what's happening. So this is just like a refrigerator. When you put your hand in, your food's cold, but you put your hand on the back of it and hot stuff's coming out. The RF that's being liberated is really heat. It turns into heat and it's expelled into space. What is the effect when that happens in us? That's entropy dump that happens in our brain, and the heat comes off our head because we're frying our mitochondria. And how do we know that's the case? There's studies now out there that I've posted on Twitter the last couple of days that show that RF radiation makes incoherent melanin. Incoherent melanin degrades into dopamine. Dopamine then breaks down, and what happens? It leads to neurodegeneration. And fundamentally, this is the reason why everybody's addicted to things that emit microwaves and RF. Why? Because it destroys your melanin, makes dopamine. You think you get the dopamine hit, but what continues to happen? This fire burns in your body, you lose all your melanin, and you're losing your magnetic flux. You become a fish, you become an amphibian, you become a bee that lives in the southern hemisphere, and we're seeing this effect in different parts of the planet. Non-native EMF is an exacerbator to this effect. Bad light, not having UV and near-infrared light, exacerbators to this effect. Why? Because that's what drives photo repair in mammals. The problem is, and I know you're going to ask me this question, does photo repair matter when magnetic declination is in your area? The
That's
answer is
exactly what I was going to ask.
it doesn't. It doesn't matter. And what matters the most is the magnetic flux. And this is something from my 20 years when I've done podcasts. We always talk about light, water, magnetism, but nobody ever wants to talk about the fucking magnetism.
Mm-hmm.
It turns out now the magnetism is turning out to be the biggest part of the story. Why? Because we're living on a planet where at least half of it has got a huge magnetic stressor. And it's a stressor that I never thought was going to be an issue for probably 25, 50,000 years. I got bad news for you. It's an issue for all of us right now. So the single most important thing in your life is still the sunrise. What's the second most important thing according to my update that I'm giving you now? You better live in an area that has magnetic inclination, not declination.
So what percentage of like the disease burden that we're currently facing do you think is caused by man-made factors versus this declination?
I think they're all just exacerbators. Why?
Yeah.
Because the data that I found of life in the areas of magnetic declination are off the charts. I mean, you just go look at cardiovascular injuries in Brazil in the last 5 years and you'll be stunned. I mean, you'll be truly stunned. It's really, really shocking. And then when you see the way the map has changed in North America, like we didn't spend much time talking about this, but remember I told you I was a big fan of Mexico, 10 years ago. Let me tell you, if you think Mexico's bad, you should see the big part of Mexico. That is absolutely worse It's almost Sahara Desert. Bad.
Yeah.
And remember, Mexico City's got a volcano on it, but that volcano has no magnetic power whatsoever. It's almost like it's been zapped. The best place in Mexico is still where the Chicxulub crater is, but it's being impinged on now by the SAA. And that is the reason why I think Mexico's pilot light's been turned out. Okay. The interesting thing is the pilot light is turned on as soon as you get to Guatemala. Like Guatemala has a volcano that's erupting right now. We have more volcanoes here than any place on Earth. Costa Rica's got volcanoes that are erupting right now. Nicaragua doesn't, but Nicaragua still on the map looks really good. There's no evidence of anything that's dying there. Panama is the interesting one. To me, Panama, I think, is okay. Panama doesn't have any active volcanoes, but I think Panama is the country you're asking me about. Is that one affected more by man-made stuff than anything else? My belief right now, based on the data I have, that's my answer. But when you ask me the question, how much of human disease burden do I believe today in April of 26? If you would have asked me the question a year ago, I would have told you 70, 80% by man-made EMF. Today, 10%.
Wow.
That's how big a deal this change is. Why? Because the change has been so substantial, the change in bandwidth for EMF hasn't been this substantial. You know, we went from 0G to 6G. The last time that I looked at the magnetic shield was in 05. And I've been monitoring it, but I didn't have good data because the data has been hidden by governments. They don't want us to know this.
Yeah.
And when this data came out, I was like, holy fuck. Like, I could not believe how bad it was. And like, there was clues. I don't want anybody to think there wasn't clues. When I started tweeting 2 years ago about the fucking earthquakes here and the eruptions here and the weather changes in different places, and then when the aurora hit Puerto Rico and Brazil, I was just like, wait a minute. Those are like two auroras almost coming together. That tells you the weakness in the field has to be tremendous. And why is this a big deal for like the people in Brazil? This is the part that I think people are going to be bothered the most by. What happens in a place like Brazil now is the Van Allen belt comes down, deuterium and tritium are going in. What's the problem with tritium? Because we've never really talked about this.
It's radioactive, right?
Well, not only radioactive, but it's got 2 neutrons and 1 proton.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the thing. When it gets incorporated into your methyl groups on your DNA, you know what it emits? It emits a beta particle. You're being radiated from inside out. And here's the other bad news. Why don't we have any good data on this from other extinction events? You know what the half-life of tritium is? 12.32 years.
Yeah.
So guess what? We'll never ever be able to see the isotopic signature. So what did I start doing 2 years ago? I started looking for evidence of other isotopes that could give me a clue. And the best isotope that I find was oxygen 18. And this should make sense because when the magnetic field gets weaker, the heavier stuff is going to stay on Earth. The lighter stuff is going to be thrown off into space. So that means oxygen 16, which is what most of us use, will be there. And it turns out there's a lot of rocks from the Permian extinction that are still accessible, and geologists are sampling. And what are they finding? The oxide minerals in these rocks are all oxygen 18. So we now can say pretty clearly that the environment in the Permian was loaded with deuterium and tritium. And the interesting thing is that's precisely what we're seeing in humans that get sick now, that they're deuterated. I haven't seen anybody tritiated yet. I haven't. But if it's going to happen,
How are you testing for it?
well, radioactivity.
Okay.
I mean, that'd be the number one thing. Like, and I'll tell you the other thing I'm using, and this should make some sense to you. Remember, we talked about dielectric constant. Like your tap water is 78, And when you go in the sun, it goes up to 160. That means, what is it effectively a measure of? From physics, it's called electrical resistivity. Okay, there's more resistance in the water. But what does it mean to people who listen to this podcast? It means that you can carry more light energy from the sun in water in your system. And what does that mean? It becomes less viscous.
Hmm.
So if you think about less viscous, that's good for vortexes. That's what mammals have. We got three of them. So that is the reason why viscosity is a big deal. So when you're deuterated or tritiated, you basically have maple syrup for blood or CSF. Okay. And that increases the inertial problem in your head or in your heart. So what would be the best test, Alexis? And I think when you were at my house, we talked about this. I told you that I like thermography, right?
Hmm.
Because you know that you're going to get a weird signal on a thermogram if the blood is too viscous. And what am I seeing in some of my ladies with breast cancer? What am I seeing in some of my patients that have hydrocephalus? I'm seeing changes on their face, that the vortex changes. Like it looks like they're getting no blood flow into their head. And I
Wow.
want you to think about what I said about the sphenoid bone being the x-axis. That sphenoid bone has all three divisions of the artery that feeds our brain: external, internal, and basilar artery. So when you see a white spot in the middle of someone's face, it tells you that their CSF ventricle is like filled with concrete. And, a lot of these patients get diagnosed with normal pressure hydrocephalus, or they'll get diagnosed with hydrocephalus, but it turns out that's not really what they have. They're deuterated, and where the real problem is, they're not able to clear deuterium at Meckel's cave, and they can't keep it in their heart vortex because the vortex doesn't have the gravity well, doesn't have the power. It's like your heart goes bad, it's a magnetic stall. So that's the reason why people that have like hydrocephalus have bad hearts. They really need to get to volcanoes. Why? We need to see if we can keep the deuterium in the blood and get it out of the brain. So then one of the things that I start telling people is I want them to start chewing gum. And I want them to start chewing mastic gum. The
Hmm.
reason for that is when you masticate, you're putting pressure on the maxilla. You know that the maxilla and the mandible are piezoelectric. The piezoelectricity gets sent to the petrous part of the temporal bone, and also the junction of the sphenoid. That's where the Meckel's cave is. If we can knock that stuff out there, then we can start getting the flow through the aqueduct of Sylvius. In other words, what we're really saying is mitochondriacs now. I've become a vortex thermodynamic clinician. Why? I am trying to get them back to a state where I can break their lattice. This is the reason why deuterium depleted water now is probably the greatest hack everybody can use who lives in an environment that's not good. For example, you're in Jersey. Bad news to you. Jersey's not a really good place to be because it's failing big time too. So deuterium depleted water for people that have these problems is huge. Let me tell you the other implication for this, because this will probably stun you. Now, can I say with some definitive proof behind me that I understand hypothyroidism better? Yes. Your brain is shutting down thyroid because with no magnetic vortex, if your metabolic rate was high, you'd be creating steam like Antarctica is making
Right.
coming out your head. So guess
So
what
it's
happens?
adaptive.
You got it. You're frying your circuits. So women who are out there that have hypothyroidism, I can tell you for the I'd say last year, I've been telling them stop taking their thyroid meds.
Right.
I want them not to do this. I want them to do way more grounding. I want them to do more cold thermogenesis. I want them to begin to listen to loud music. I want them to start pounding their chests. I want them to start chewing gum. Like we have to go back to the Archean way of removing deuterium when our lattice cannot be defragged. And are there things now out there that can defrag the lattice differently? Yeah, like deuterium depleted water is probably the safest, cheapest one. But is there evidence out there that the psychedelics can do it? Yes. Is there evidence out there that cannabis plays a role here too? Yes, there is. There's good evidence for that too. But again, people that are neurocognitively impaired, these drugs are going to have different effects. Why? Because the inertial pressures that they have both in their heart and their head is different. Like, I'll give you a perfect example. This will just show you how much I've been paying attention to this, because this just happened actually yesterday on Twitter. So I have a lot of general surgery friends that I stayed in contact with from my residency. And one of the things that they started telling me about 10 years ago is that they were starting to see way more splenic ruptures, spontaneous atraumatic splenic ruptures. And they kept asking me, what do you think this is from? And I said, well, I think I have an idea. The spleen is where we take red blood cells out every 120 days. Red blood cells swim in 150 parts per deuterium. I said, could it be that if we have more deuterium in the blood, that the blood is getting cycled out faster and the spleens are getting bigger? And if that's the case, you should be able to do CT scans and see the spleen hanging off the back wall of the omentum, and it should be sagging. So don't you think people started to do that? And they said, you're right. All these people had spleens that were hanging low. Then I said to one of my general surgery buddies in New Orleans, I said, the way you should use, the test that you should use in the lab that links to this is homocysteine. Why? Homocysteine relies on methylation so that if people are heavily deuterated, their homocysteine should go up, their spleen should get bigger. Mm-hmm. It should also have an effect on their kidneys and their lungs as well. You know, and this is what like Max Gilhane and the people that you talk to call fucking visceral fat. It's not fucking visceral fat. It's fucking deuterium. It's deuterium in the fat. And then when you explain to these retards that deuterium actually acts on adipocytes to change them from brown fat cells to white cells, and deuterium actually increases your white cell adipocyte mass, you start to go, this is what's happening. So I told them, while the spleen gets bigger, they should also have more intra-abdominal fat. And you would think that the fat would take the shock. It won't. And then I told them something really interesting. I said, the people that should get more atraumatic splenic ruptures should be pregnant women. And he just stopped. He goes, you're not going to believe this. Last 6 months, he goes, I've had 3 women pregnant who had ruptured spleens. Wow. And I said, well, this makes a lot of sense, because when a woman gets pregnant, her hematocrit goes down. That means her red mass goes down, but what goes up? Her water in her blood. That's to actually have the baby. And I said, she is going to be isotopically heavy. The spleen's already going to be big. The risk in her is going to be bigger. And I said, I would also tell you, not only will her homocysteine be up, but you'll also notice that these women in the 3rd trimester, when the baby gets big, because the mom is spinning the deuterium into the baby, you'll start to notice that mom has problems with her heart, like rhythm changes. Doesn't mean she has disease. It's because the vortex in the heart can't handle the isotopic load that's delivered to it. And then the final part of this pathophysiology that I was having with the doctors that I teach was, I told them, look at their aorta, look at their carotids. Even though they're 30 and 40 years old, they should all have evidence of PAD. And the reason why they'll have PAD should be obvious to you now. If you have isotopically thick blood that's viscous, you're going to be causing intimal damage. When you get intimal damage, what happens? ApoB, LPA, everything goes up, because that's the spackle the body puts there. But what you should see in people that get the ruptures, they'll have frank calcifications in the central vessels coming out of the heart. Alexis, every single case that had a splenic rupture had that.
Wow.
So when people tell me that I don't know what I'm doing, or I'm a quack, or I don't understand the biophysics, I can promise you that I do get it. I do understand it. But when you talk to people who've been trained in Rockefeller medicine, they don't learn about isotopic fractionation. They have no idea that melanin is designed to use the nuclear magnetic moment to get rid of deuterium and tritium. They most of them have no idea that, like, in the surface of your aorta and your carotid arteries, you have something called the intima. The intima is made out of elastin and fibrillin. Do you know that neural crest cells in the embryo follow elastin and fibrillin to get to where they need to be? So just think about that, that the POMC that's supposed to be in your carotid artery is getting taken out, not only by blue light, but also deuterium. What is really a PAD collection of calcium? It's actually where melanin is dropping off calcium at the scene of the crime. But the scene of the crime is from the isotopic injury that's happening in the mitochondria. And I don't really think people really understand that. And that also explains why neurologic diseases and heart diseases go together. Why? Because what's the link? The gravity well to the GPS axis. It's the CSF axis. When you realize what the connection is through the choroid plexus and what the choroid plexus is fundamentally doing, it's isotopically fractionating deuterium to make CSF 120, 110. Why? Because when it vortexes, it doesn't have to be 50 or 20 like it is in the bottles that people drink,
Mm-hmm.
because the aqueduct is pushing all the deuterium out to get rid of it out of Luschka, so that the vagal motor trigone gets hit with nothing but H plus. And think about the ladies that get hyperemesis during pregnancy. Now you know why. Because the stuff that's being laminar flowed is deuterium hitting their vagal motor trigone. And if you want to know like why kids get enuresis, now you know why. They came from a mother that was heavily deuterated. The whole surface part of their lateral, third, and fourth ventricle is where all the osmolar receptors are for sodium. So these kids are isotopically heavy. But we've got doctors telling people, oh yeah, your kid is just going through a phase. No, it's a sign fucking mom spun a lot of deuterium into the baby. And they're usually living in bad areas. I used to blame them, for using tech. And it turned out when I blamed them on tech, it turned out I was mostly right. But I never really realized that the land they were living under was really bad. And I guess since most of your people are going to be from the United States, what's the worst place in the United States to live based on the new data? Any place in the Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
Like the isotopically worst area is probably between Kansas and Texas.
I mean, that's where all the obesity and the cancer is too.
Well, the number one place where obesity is in the United States right now, that's also changed, Alexis. You know
Okay.
where it is?
I thought it's like somewhere in the Midwest. I don't remember exactly.
Memphis and Arkansas right now.
Mm.
And I went when I got the USGS data, I went to look at the NHANES data, and I found out exactly where the magnetic field has dropped the most in the United States. People have gotten the fattest.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
I mean, my TED talk that got banned, when I said that obesity is an inflammatory brain condition, that was spot on, because that's what it is. The problem is the inflammation is the deuterium.
Right. Now, the question that I have for you is, do you think there's anything we're doing on the planet that is accelerating the declination of the magnetic field, or do you think this is a natural cycle, like HARP or like CERN? Like, do you think there's any effect of these
All
like
right,
big hubs?
grab a hold of your chairs.
All right.
Since you're a PhD, what I'm about to say to you is probably going to rock your world. What if I was to tell you, and I've already told you that non-native EMF exacerbates the problem in the head. What if I was to tell you that shitcoinery and AI is a natural evolution of not being able to think?
Yeah,
And
that
I'll
makes
explain to
perfect
you
sense.
why. Because if you understand the thesis that's being developed here, someday soon, next 100, 200, 300 years, people are going to have to put a transcranial magnet behind their occiput to stay awake.
Right, right.
So you understand that the people in the big tech industry, whether they know or not, I believe they know. Do you understand now why AI may actually play a role for the survival of humanity? Why? Because we have to upload what we know into the cloud that won't be affected by this inertial drag of the vortex. And does this make sense now? Why people are taking more risk by gambling and doing shitcoinery? Yeah. What did I tell you before? Anytime the magnetic field drops, oxygen drops. What does that mean to melanin? Melanin goes to dopamine. You're into low dopamine behaviors. What is gambling? There you go. So your answer to the question is yes, there are things we're doing that are exacerbating this. Do I think it'll affect your N equals one more? Yes. Do I think when you understand what I'm saying here clearly, the answer becomes pretty obvious what you need to do? Do I think that most of the things that are being advocated by influencers, food gurus, are really problematic? Yeah, I mean, I would tell you this is the main reason. Like anybody out there that thinks taking peptides is going to make these three vortex spin faster, you're just a fucking moron and I can't help you. But here's the big thing. This explains the reason why the Rockefeller food pyramid's a real problem, because it added isotopes
Mm-hmm.
you can't get rid of. This is the real reason that jabs are a problem. Why? You know that I posted that paper that showed that every single manufactured jab had between 50 and 55 extra atoms in it
Yeah.
that weren't declared on the patent. So just imagine when you add that, then let's do another hard stop. Instead of going conspiracy, let's stay in my world. Let me throw myself under the bus. Why did I stop doing contrasted MRIs about 15 years ago? Because I had an inclination that gadolinium as a transmission metal wasn't a good thing to put into the CSF. Why? Because every time I did it, I saw that my patients cognitively weren't the same. So I
Mm-hmm.
stopped doing it. So I'm going to tell you, most of the radiologists that are out there and the neurosurgeons, they don't know what I just said, but I knew about it. And I started realizing it was a big effect. Like there's holistic dentists out there that are telling people to have their palates expanded and moved for the, no, you just need to chew fucking mastic gum. If you've got GERD, you don't need to kill the bacteria. It's the fucking deuterium with the H. pylori. Most people don't even know that H. pylori flourishes in deuterium. Why is the deuterium in your gut? Because your fucking bicarb exhaust in the beta cells is washed out, just like, the South Atlantic anomaly is blocked. So the answer really is there. We all have to become experts in isotopic fractionation. And do I believe that people can do a lot? Yes, because I don't think a lot of these things are going to matter. Here's the really bad news. You already know that I was trending this way big time. So I don't take any affiliate codes for red light. Red light is absolutely useless for this. You need to use sun. There is absolutely no question. Why? Because what do we know about vortexing? We know that UV and near infrared light create a frequency called 0.66 electron volts that ties directly back to the infrared spectrum of the sun. That actually makes the vortex work faster. What does that correlate with? Correlates with a dielectric constant of 160 in CSF and in the blood. So that means it thins our blood the most. If you run a test utilizing anybody's red light panel that's LED based, you will never change the dielectric constant of their fluid. Is that a study that needs to be done? Yes, because when people begin to understand what I'm saying, that the game in town right now for mitochondriacs is we have to make the vortex work and work faster. And the problem is when you begin to understand that the water component stops the ATPase from spinning at 9,000 revolutions per second, you begin to understand, okay, so that's what fibromyalgia is. Begin to understand. So that might be what ALS is. Like if you're asking neurons to spin, I don't know, concrete, it can't do it, so you can't work. How about sick man syndrome? Same story. I want you to remember this. People forget this. What is the second largest compartment of water in the human body? Muscles. So guess what? If the water in those muscles are all deuterated, do you understand now why doing exercise may actually harm people when you're asking the actin and filament to go against maple syrup?
Mm-hmm.
Got it? So exercise even has to be countered in this because normally exercise is a good thing. It's a good thing when the viscosity of your water is not 78. This is another reason why you see people who are physically fit dropping dead after COVID because when they're in the blue light gym, all their water is like maple syrup. And they don't understand how this works. And then you have to casually remind them, by the way, your heart is also a muscle. And it's supposed to be vortexing the maple syrup. You know, when you make it kind of retard proof for people, I think they begin to see it. Most of them don't like it because it goes against what they've been taught their whole life. But you have to realize, why is this important? This variable that we've spent a lot of time talking about, this is a variable that none of us can control.
Mm-hmm.
This is the earth doing this. Okay. Meaning that we have to understand what this means for the way we were built when the magnetic flux was off the charts 320 million years ago. I mean, it's been good really all the way until the Carrington event. The Carrington event was when this shit hit the fan. And do I anticipate in the next several hundred years that Earth will be hit by another CME like that, maybe even bigger, if the wobble due to the dynamo gets any worse? Yeah, I mean, the worst case scenario is look through a telescope and take a look at Mars. It's got a fucking 3,600-mile gash in it that killed the planet, and the whole hemisphere on one top is missing 30 kilometers of rock. Like, Mars was destroyed. But what does that tell me? Isotopically, the dynamo there 4 billion years ago was probably like concrete. And what was the sun trying to do? Hit it to get it going. And we know it worked at some point because you can't have Olympic Mons on Mars without having a huge volcano. I mean, it's the biggest volcano in the entire solar system. We know that. So that tells us the process broke. And I think the real take home for people here, if they're truly understanding what I'm saying, this vortex phenomenon did not start off on Earth in the beginning. In the Archean Earth and great oxygenation Earth, remember, oxygen wasn't available in the beginning. It went from 0% all the way up to 35 and then back down to 21. It went up to 35 in the Carboniferous period. And the Carboniferous period is when all life got gigantic. In fact, that's how we got dinosaurs to be so big. It's when we had insects the size of 747s. But what happened? That's when the magnetic field was through the roof. And then what happened? It came back down, and it's been pretty stable for about 65 million years. Now, the only other event that I can point to for you and your listeners is, you know, that I've told you the story both personally and on the podcast about Neanderthals. This hopefully make you understand the last CHAMP event, that's spelled LAS CHAMP, happened 42,000 years ago. That is the event that I think took the Neanderthals out. But it also took the megafauna out in North America. Why? The same effect that we're talking about now, magnetic declination. Neanderthals had 125 grams more brain tissue than we do. But what really happened? I think they wound up going inside, more light, shrunk their brain, but I think the magnetic declination played a huge effect. Why? Because when they got above the 51st latitude, their magnetic vortex in their brain made their brain, how shall we say, expensive, and they started to burn it up, just like I told you what's happening in Antarctica. And I believe that's how we lost the 125 grams. What happens? We show up, we have more dopamine, and then cave art shows up on the inside because of the dopamine. And we all think creativity is great. And remember when I said to you, yeah, creativity is kind of a sign of neurodegeneration. And, you know, when I said it the first time publicly, people questioned it. And then I showed them the melanin slide. And I said, look what it says. When you have deoxygenation, you lose melanin, you lose brain cells. And what happened between Neanderthals and us? Just think about it. Brain got smaller, water content went up, and the melanin level went up on a relative basis as we shrunk. What do I think the key was for humans? The vortex became faster. We got smaller, but our vortex got faster. That's why we survived and the Neanderthals didn't. And that was at the last big magnetic declination event. That's called the last champ event. Guys can go look it up. There was another minor one that happened about 11,000 years ago. That's the Younger Dryas. That also is a big hit. And what's the link for me there? If you go on my forum and you start reading some of the stuff that I've posted since I've reviewed this data, I'm trying to teach my members about how the brain reacts to magnetic declination. So the animal that I like to use is elephants compared to rhinos, because most of my patients today are rhinos. They have thick skin because it's loaded with deuterium and their brains are shrinking. But they forget that elephants have thin skin and they have massive brains, 22 pounds. And what was the animal that was taken out in Last Champ and then a Younger Dryas? The woolly mammoth. So there's a lesson there for all of us. And remember, woolly mammoth and elephant brains, 22 pounds. Big, huge. And why was the brain so big? Because the trunk of the woolly mammoth and elephant has 100,000 muscles in it. So they needed a big brain to do that. How did they do that? They were located when they evolved, at least the woolly mammoth and elephant, we think about 26 million years ago. 26 million years ago is when the magnetic field was very, very strong. And that allowed the elephant to encephalize. This is another big lesson in evolutionary biology I try to teach. Why? Because what do rhinos, elephants, gorillas, and humans all have in common? They all grew up in the same environment, but they all have different outcomes in their brains. Explain. And it turns out the explanation is magnetic inclination. It's a very interesting thing. And like, if you think about all the changes between chimps and gorillas and us, the number one thing that I hope people are taking away from this discussion, do you understand now why we went bipedal? Bipedal means the vortex runs faster.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that we can unfurl our central nervous system bigger. That's why we can talk. That's why we can do things. Now, I want you to think about another evolutionary biology thing. For you as a scientist, I think this will resonate. What connects the hindbrain, the floor of the fourth ventricle, to the bicarb system, the vagus nerve? It's called the wander in Latin. So just remember, it starts at the vagal motor trigone at the fourth ventricle, but it makes a pit stop where? In your voice box, the recurrent laryngeal nerve. So when we talk, what are we doing, Alexis?
Vibrating.
We're deuterium depleting the x-axis sphenoid bone and Meckel's cave. So we're deuterium depleting. Let me do that. Let me give you another one. Look inside the mouth of a gorilla and us. What do you'll notice? They have predator teeth, even though they're herbivores. We have herbivore teeth, even though we're predators. Why is that? To make chewing less efficient so that we chew more to stimulate Meckel's cave to get rid of deuterium.
I'm thinking also like chanting and like the Eastern cultures related to this.
M-tones.
Yeah.
So you know where that story goes? If you go on my website forum, you will see that there's a thread that's developed, not from me, from someone else, about why did hospitals have bells in 1880 through 1930 and why were they removed? Those bells used to resonate at 20 to 40 hertz. Guess what 20 to 40 hertz does? Removes deuterium from the brain, improves the vortex.
Wow.
Again, this is all before quantum mechanics and vortex thermodynamics is known. But what did people back then know? They knew. Who took those bells out? The Rockefeller dynasty. That was right around the Flexner report. And when you understand, this is the reason why. I mean, you know a little bit more about me than most of the people listening to this. Now you understand why I like Metallica. Now you understand why I like a Tool, because the bass drum there actually is resonating and vibrating.
Wow.
Within us. When I go in the pool back here, why do I stand right next to the jet that comes out? Why do I have the jets really high on my pools? Now you know the reason why. Like, I've known all these things for a really long time. I don't really talk about them too much. Why? Because this is usually the stuff that I talk to my farm clients about. These are the people that I'm taking care of one-on-one. The thing is, when this new data comes out, I think now this is really the base case for most diseases. And I think people need to understand this, because I think the best hack for this is you need to get to places where the magnetic field is strong. That's really the core message. But you also need to understand over the next, I don't know, 500 years, that place is likely going to change over
Mhm.
time. So you have to be facile. Like, I didn't expect the change that happened in the last 20 years. And I'm just fortunate that I went to one of the places that is now the best. But why did I do that? Is because I suspended my centralized, education to understand that the biophysics of how we really work is important. And I think that has made a big difference. I just, the difficult questions those guys that came to interview me that wound up selling some of the clips to Alex Jones, they asked me some pretty tough questions, questions where, well, what would you do based on this new information? Yeah, those are big deals. Why? Because they tie directly to my kids and the way that I'm thinking about it. I'm not really too worried about me, because if I die tomorrow, I could care less. But do I think about the people down the road that are getting absolutely no help from the doctors at home who keep telling them absolute bullshit? Am I concerned about the doctors who do care and, call me up and say, look, this is the sixth splenic rupture I've seen in the last 6 months. And, in my residency, I never saw this. Or from the vascular surgeons, I'm seeing, you know, Alzheimer dementia changes in people that are 20 and 30 years old. Yeah, those, let me tell you, those phone calls that I get, and I get a lot of them, they're increasing. And what do I do every time I talk to a doctor? I ask them their zip code. And I think that's what all of you guys need to start doing too. I think the zip code and how people get sick is actually something that should become a quantum biology trait. And I think when you start to see that people are doing better in that world, or I'd even say talking to veterinarians, I do the same thing. I want to know where pets are getting sicker.
Mhm.
Um, I want to know, what's happening in different parts of the world. Why? Because I realize what's going on inside the planet is being resonated on top of the planet. And since we are, unfortunately, the canaries in the coal mine, so are birds, so are bees, so are the fishes. I think when you get this framework in your head, I think that then you can live out your life, properly. You can inform your kids properly. You can teach them, the science, because this science to me is absolutely basic. It's not difficult to understand. Um, People want to make it difficult to understand. Like, if you really want to, do all the mathematics and all the shit that I had to go through to understand this stuff, yeah, you don't need to know it like that. All you need to know is what the human agrarian is built, and it's built around vortexing blood, CSF, and the ATPase. The entire mammal clade is built around that. So are birds. And you have to remember, there are partners that made it through with us. But what was the key factor that joined us? We are strongly yoked to magnetic field. If the magnetic field goes, birds and humans are the first up on the list.
Do you,
Why? Because
sorry.
we're built for it.
Do you think there's any organisms that are like evolving or adapting to the decline in the magnetic field?
Oh yeah, I got them listed on my form. People have already asked me that on my form, so I just listed it. I said, here's the animals that are going to survive. Like, for example, sharks. Sharks are also like mammals. They have a body called the body of Lorenzi. Lorenzi is totally yoked to the magnetic field. You know what the advantage that sharks have over us? They're down in the water. They can use the weight of the water to deuterium deplete. The big issue is they won't be able to eat anything on the top of the water, because everything in the top of the water table, if this gets much worse, will be deuterated and tritiated. Now, they could dive deep and get rid of it, but you can't get rid of the radiation. The radiation will probably kill them. before, but what's going to happen? All the animals that live deep in the ocean will survive. That's why I said this is the exact opposite of what's happening or happened in the Permian. Like oxygenation in the atmosphere, and probably I'd say the first mile of water on the oceans will be absolutely irradiated with tritium. And you cannot eat from that food chain, otherwise you'll die. But animals deep in the water, they will do fine. They're not going to have a problem at all. So cephalopods are going to be another one that'll do really, really well. Like the Greenland shark, which we think is the oldest animal on the planet. They just found one that was like 40,000 years old. Why? Because it lives in deep, deep water. Does this make some sense now why Trump, wants to go after Greenland? It should. Why? Because Greenland on the top of it may be the ideal place to go fishing to feed a population. So do I understand this now? I used to think it was completely crazy until when I saw the data that fucking Siberia is now 335 nanotesla. I just couldn't believe it. And here's like the things that flip things around. This is why new data is interesting. If you would have talked to me 2-3 years ago, I would have said living in Norway on the top of it is crazy. Now it's not so crazy. Now you still will struggle to photo repair, but your magnetic flux, because you're a mammal, you'll be able to tolerate low UV for a longer period of time. The key is you cannot eat any excess heavy matter at all. You have to really run low isotopic fuels. And when you understand this, then you begin to understand why the carnivore diet, so many people are getting a benefit from it, because that's a diet that's isotopically light. It's isotopically heavy. And it brings into the idea of the leptin prescription. Like people have always asked me, why was the leptin prescription built the way it was? I mean, if you think and listen carefully to the things you and I have talked about, you realize that you ground, you see the morning sunlight. What's breakfast really? It's the isotopic load that gets the vortex working. And when you actually begin to see it, you go, fuck, he's been telling us this for 25 years, but we never really understood where he was going with it. Now you begin to see how this fundamentally works. And obviously, the one thing that mammals really need, especially us, and that's why I can't get too crazy about pushing Finland, Sweden, and Norway, is we really need to keep the MITF AMPAR system going. That's melanin. MITF is the precursor for melanin, and in terms of how it gets translated from POMC, you have to have melanin in your central nervous system to fractionate, to make the vortex in your brain. So that's the reason why I think for humans, we're going to face, and if I was to bet, I put this on my form already, the 51st latitude is where I think magnetic declination is going to play a huge role. And in the southern hemisphere, 18 south. Like you got to be tropical already. That's how weak it is. It's a big difference. It's a really, really big difference. And I guess the one thing we're fortunate about in this event, that there's not a lot of land masses in the Southern Ocean. There's just Australia, the tip of Africa, and a pretty good fucking chunk of South America. Some of the islands, the Pacific islands, they're bad. Most of them are volcanic. Some of them are pretty good, but some of the ones you think not so great. Like China, really bad news. Korea looks pretty good. Philippines, solid. But a lot of the other countries there. But I think people in old Europe, I'm talking about Turkey, Prague, Russia. Russia should do fabulous. I mean, they're next to the strongest vortex in the world. Problem is, photosynthesis doesn't work in Siberia. So it's kind of, it's kind of a problem. And while you can fish there, I don't think you can live there because there won't be enough sun for you to support your melanin system. Um, and I think obviously the use of technology is now a steepened risk. Like if you're in the southern hemisphere, if you're a tech abuser, you will decline into neurodegeneration and heart disease faster.
Well, it makes so much sense why Russia wants Ukraine back to grow their food.
Correct. Exactly. That's why I said when I tell you, Alexis, when I've talked to my network, like I just did a podcast yesterday with Marty Bent, the Bitcoiner guys,
Hmm.
and this came up. Why? Because I'm going to be talking about this in Prague in June, but in a different way. I'm going to be talking about the Bitcoin librarian and how it ties into this story. When I started the podcast, I told Marty what's going on in the magnetic field actually is playing a role in Bitcoin. And I think hopefully people who've listened to this whole podcast, because we've been talking for a while, they'll begin to realize now why Bitcoin's really important because Bitcoin will allow you to get to these places where the magnetic field is strong. Because this trend, if we're being very clear, because I'm trying to be as transparent as I can here, this trend is not going away. This trend is getting bigger and faster. That's what the 20-year experience from when I wrote the quilt document to right now has taught me. Like, if I was in Vegas betting that I would be having this podcast with somebody like you today and telling you that, yeah, the magnetic field in 20 years moved as fast as it did in 320 million years of evolution, I would have called myself a fucking bullshit artist. But it's fucking true. And because it's true, we got to deal with the consequences of that. And that means that we have to adjust our template of the advice that we deliver to people and understand why we're adapting it. If you think this is fun for me to have to talk about, it's not. It's really not. And there's a lot of people out there, especially my members, because I have to do a Q&A tomorrow. And I can tell you because of the stuff that I've put on the forum. Like when I tell you that I've put close to 50 extra blogs on the forum for people that have these diseases, like this is what you need to do now that's different. Yeah, that's happening. Uh, it's a big deal. And for people who don't get it, I'll tell you the flip side of that too. I'm blocking all the time. I don't have time anymore to deal with bullshit artists. Like, if you don't understand that this is not Jack Kruse's opinion, like, I don't fucking control the wizard that controls the Dynamo. Okay. I don't. All I can do is report on the Dynamo and report what I found when I went on the surface of the Dynamo in the Southern Hemisphere. All of that information I shared with you is discoverable by using search boxes. Now, the interesting thing is when you do put a search in, are the bees dying in Australia? They'll always blame it on something that isn't magnetic declination. That should be clear to you that they know, because there's no way the SEO search is going to, tell you the truth. Because if you did, you'd probably go, okay, it's time to fucking, pack up the house, sell it, and let's go. It's
So,
time to.
assuming the powers that be do know what's going on, what do you think they're trying to do behind the scenes? Do you think, is there something with the bunkers that's related to this story, or is there something else you think they're trying to build or do
Yeah.
to
I
buffer
mean,
this?
you think about the people who are your clients. They're coming to you for survival too, right? Well, what do
Yeah.
governments do? They're planning for their survival as well.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to realize, does it make sense now why they're building bunkers under the White House? Does it make sense why some of the congressmen have spent millions of dollars? Does it make sense now why Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos have these big yachts going all over the ocean? Now, I mean, for purposes, Alexis happens to know that that's been one of my plans for a really long time. She now knows why I've been up to this because I've known this is coming. The problem is, I don't think people really understand the science well. People will listen to this and go, this is like hyperbolic. No,
Yeah.
it's been going on for 167 years since 1859. We are sampling it right now. It's not like I think the world's going to end in like fucking 5 years. I think this is probably decades or hundreds of years off. But what am I saying to you? That the future, the change is going to be rapid, and the
Hmm.
change is going to happen likely more in the southern hemisphere than the northern hemisphere. And do I think the ultimate survival, like say if this happens 25,000 years from now, the survivors of this extinction event will come from the northern hemisphere? Where? My bet is it's going to be where magnetic flux is the strongest or where animals can live deepest, closest to the magnetosphere. That is the reason why I think governments are digging holes in the ground, because they know that. And remember, they also know what happened to Puerto Rico. If we get hit with a huge CME, you want to be as far away from the fucking surface as possible if you're running a government, because everything that has a wire or a battery or a motor is fucking useless.
Yeah.
So you got to put it under the ground. Now, the good news for people listening to this, because I know people are saying, well, you just said that about, my car. It won't work if we get hit with a CME. What about me? In 1859, Alexander Graham Bell was working on the telephone, and he got burned and shocked when the wires got hot and started a fire. Did he die? And the answer is no. Humans and other animals do not die from a coronal mass ejection as long as it's not planet shattering like it was on Mars.
Right.
But if we get hit with an X class, I'm going to tell you personally, it may be the best thing ever, because it acts like a defibrillator that a doctor would use to restart your heart. It can get the dynamo flowing good. We can get some eruptions down in the Pacific Rim in the southern hemisphere.
And it'll take all the bullshit tech out.
That's where I was going. See, that's the whipped cream and cherry on top of this Sunday, because I do believe that happens. But, to answer your point where we went down this track, this is the reason why governments have to plan for this, because they now know it's much more likely they're going to get hit with a CME when the magnetic shield is down. There's nothing
Right.
they can do about it. They have to protect for it. And then this gives you the second issue. Is this the real reason why Neuralink's being developed? Because they now know that everybody may need a Neuralink somewhere down the road to run the vortex in their head so they can be conscious. Yeah, I hate to say it, but this is the new version of the cochlear implant, except a whole lot different. It's going to be running a different vortex, not the one that's in your cochlea. It's going to be running the one in your fucking thalamus. And ultimately, do I think that's the case? I mean, just so you guys know, if you go and do homework on this and try to fact check Uncle Jack, this is the reason why Neuralink satellites and the swarm satellites can't fly over the South Atlantic anomaly. Why? Because the Van Allen radiation belts are literally, they're not even 100,000 kilometers above the surface now. And this is loaded with fucking deuterium and tritium. This destroys the satellite. Do you know what? You know what NASA has to do when they started to fly through this? They have to turn the entire ship off, don't use any computers, and then it's not damaged.
Mm-hmm.
And how did we find this out? In 1996, Japan sent a satellite up to do X-ray pictures of space, specifically stars. They didn't know about the South Atlantic anomaly. They lost $1 billion satellite when it flew through the SAA.
Wow.
So if people don't really think that this is a big deal, these are discoverable things that you can find right now by doing your own homework, and realize that the story for technology is way worse than it really is for us.
Mm-hmm.
When I say we're in an extinction event, I don't say it hyperbolically. And just so everybody's clear, if you go look, I think about 10 years ago, a lady named Elizabeth Kolbert wrote a book called the Next Extinction, or the Sixth Extinction. It's about this event. And she went all over the world, kind of like I've been doing, asking the same questions I've been asking. And she came to the conclusion, because who was she, Colbert? She was a New York Times reporter who quit after doing this and writing the book. So you guys can go buy her book. That's old. You probably find it Goodwill now, and read what she wrote 10 years ago. Now the risks are even higher because the data that we have is better. We now have swarm satellites that are actually monitoring the SAA. constantly, and we know it's getting bigger. Like, this is not hyperbole. Now is the part for you to sit down and understand how this science impacts you, your family, your disease. I mean, if you think about this, hypothyroidism now is not something to fear. It's actually telling you, I fucking live in a magnetically declined area, and maybe that's the reason I need to move, not fucking be on T3 and T4. Because if you get on T3 and T4, it actually makes your cognition worse.
Mm-hmm.
How's that for a reversal? That's
Mm-hmm.
the reason why new data for science is really important to understand.
Do you think the timing of this moon mission is related to this story at all or
Yes,
unrelated?
absolutely. No question about it.
Yeah, I wonder what do you think what kind of data do you think they're looking for up there?
Well, I think the number one thing is they have to test Neuralink on astronauts. If you want to know what it means, why would you go to the moon and Mars, which have no
Hmm.
magnetic field?
Right.
Well, that's the best place to test out how humans will fare in a complete failure. Let's say we have a true Permian extinction event. They want to know, do we have to put humans in Trident subs and put them on the bottom of the ocean until the event clears? Or can we put everybody in a water-filled pod, uh, put them in a state of suspended animation like anesthesia, and then put a Neuralink into their posterior part of their occipital lobe? And when everything, the coast is clear, defrag their lattice with the Neuralink.
That sounds like a movie I've seen.
Well, it may be a movie, but I mean, right now, just think about the water lattice in you, the dielectric. In that kind of scenario, like in a true environment that's tritiated and deuterated, you're basically turning CSF and blood into concrete.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no damage to the human body if you don't run the ATP ACEs.
Right.
So what do you have to do? You have to turn everything off, kind of like what we found out with the satellites. Like when they go through, they're okay, just turn them off. And I think when you see it from this view, you can see that a lot of the things that the conspiracy guys were moaning and bitching about, maybe there's a bigger purpose for them now. Maybe,
Right.
maybe you just didn't understand the purpose. And I think maybe you need to. And I think this really has big implications for a lot of different things. Like, I'll give you another one that I talked to Marty about that'll probably stun you. Does it make sense now why Israelis have gone to the tip of Patagonia and lit it on fire? Well, yeah, because they know they're going to need a place for a lot of their people to go. What better place than where the South Atlantic anomaly is bad? We're on the edge, but it looks like the tip is spectacular because it's right next to the Humboldt Current that's going to have a huge amount of seafood. So these will be Zionists that actually have to eat seafood and break all the
Right.
Judaism traditions to survive. Well, I mean, I guess if you're the chosen people, you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I think it's very interesting to think about this story, then like overlay it onto our geopolitics to see how behaviors are actually making sense.
Yes. Then you'll begin to see the world in a very different way. And it begins to give a new shape, to the term that I coined 4 years ago about tapering the Ponzi scheme. Do you understand now why they have medically assisted suicide in Canada? Like, we haven't talked too much about
Mhm.
Canada. Canada has had the magnetic north moving away from it. I wouldn't be caught dead living in Canada based on this new data. And think about the population in Canada. They're basically already comfortably numb. They're all low dopamine people. You begin to understand why. And why would Canada really offer? Because they know that the people there aren't going to survive anyway. So they're dead weight. It's kind of like Ebenezer Scrooge when the two guys came to visit him and said, "Would you like to donate for the poor?" And this and that. He goes, "No, we'll let them just die and decrease the surplus population."
Right, right, right.
Well,
That's the depopulation agenda.
I kind of think that when I look at the medically assisted suicide story in Canada, now, not that I like it, but do I understand it better than I did before? Can I see COVID in a different light now?
Hmm.
Do I understand what Rockefeller medicine is really doing? I do. Do I understand what Big Pharma is really doing? I do, but I still think they're nefarious as fuck. Why? Because if they've known about this, which I think they do, they're complicit in doing things without giving people truly informed consent.
Yeah.
And, that used to be the big argument in vaccination, but I have to tell you, now the argument comes down to food. I mean, just think about supplements now. Think about like all the things in the influencer world that are being pushed on people. And you have to remember, these are all people that melanin is being degraded to dopamine. So they all are nihilistic and have low dopamine personalities. They're all willing to take more risks. That also totally fits with a magnetic decline.
Hmm.
Risk-taking behavior will absolutely be at the top of the evolutionary chain all the way down. The animals that will take the lowest risk are going to be the ones at the bottom of the ocean. They're going to be like, nah, I'm good. I don't think I'm going to have a problem.
Hmm.
They're just going to live their life the way they've been living it for the last fucking 400 million years.
Yeah.
The
I mean,
problem is
yeah,
we're not adapted for that environment. That's the
right.
problem.
Yeah, I feel like the individuals that want to take the biggest risks have the biggest issues also. I mean, if you're content and happy, you don't need to take a risk.
Well, and I think if you think about like the things that I've said for 20 years, all the things that are buried in the leptin melanocortin pathway, the leptin prescription and cold thermogenesis, they are all deuterium depleting things. When you actually get down to the brass tacks and distill the message, now I think people are beginning to understand it way better because they get it. Now the question that people are going to be asking me is how do you defrag a lattice that's inertially locked?
Hmm.
That is a different ball game. Like
Hmm.
that is a ball game that is new. And that means that we have to then think about the Archean Librarian. Like I have a thread on my forum that I think is pretty good. It talks about the Archean Librarian, the bacterial Librarian, then the eukaryotic Librarian. It turns out that endosymbiosis Librarian, the parts in us that we have to use that are truly Archean, I'll explain it to you, are bones and our z-axis, the gravity well of the heart. Those are fundamentally Archean. Where is the battle of endosymbiosis being waged in us every day? The inner mitochondrial membrane. So what's the number one effect on the inner mitochondrial membrane of magnetic declination? NAD positive dropping. Why? Because the H that's supposed to be there is now deuterated.
Hmm.
So what does that effectively do to the inner mitochondrial membrane, that Nick Lane famously said has a 30 million volt charge? Well, now it's only 20 million, maybe 15. So that means, can you run the most complex quantum machine in a fucking skull on half the fucking electric charge? No, the answer is the effect is going to be seen in the spin rate of the FO head of the ATPase. Instead of going 9,000 revolutions per second, it's going to be 7,000. And basically, we just described to you what cognitive haze is all about. Like, there should be no more mystery anymore.
So,
But
like, neurodegeneration is kind of an adaptive way to keep the individual alive
correct.
when they can't support it bioenergetically.
Right. Because the problem is the water that's in the brain is isotopically heavy. I mean, that's fundamentally really what most cases of hydrocephalus are. That's what normal pressure hydrocephalus is. You don't think that this has huge implications for my specific specialty. And I think this is the reason why I was able to figure this stuff out, because most of the diseases, like I'll give you another one that you probably haven't thought about. We talked about Meckel's cave. You should now understand what trigeminal neuralgia is. You should also understand, since Luschka gets deuterium out in the CP angle, okay, Jack, is this the reason why we get acoustic neuromas? Because acoustic neuromas are acting like a coconut does. It's filled with deuterium depleted water. The answer is yes. And why? It's supposed to go through Meckel's cave, okay, to get back out. Well, they can't, because guess what? The articulation of the facial bones and the sphenoid, we're not doing that because all the fake food that people are eating now is designed to be swallowed up in your mouth, turned straight to sugar, right?
Right.
You're not doing any chewing.
Yeah.
People are not chewing, animal bones and meat off of it like we used to. That's what we're supposed to do.
Hmm.
And when you actually think about it, you start to go, Jesus, this makes so much sense. because everything begins to fit. But you have to realize when I started putting this all together and wrote the leptin prescription, the cold thermogenesis protocol, you have to realize here I am, a Rockefeller trained doctor that realized in 18 months everything I knew was wrong. And like this podcast, I think people are beginning to see why I said that because this explains it, crystal clear. And what puts the whipped cream on the top of this whole sundae? Light, water, and magnetism. And no one really ever wanted to talk about the magnetism because they couldn't figure out where it fit in. Well, I got some bad news here. I think a lot of the podcast I'll do, probably from 2026 on, is going to be focusing on this issue because the number one game for all of us is how do we defrag the lattice?
Mm-hmm.
That's the answer. And the simple way is we do it through deuterium depleted water because it's clear that works. But let me tell you just how long-ranging this effect is. If you know about the evolution of chimps and monkeys to us, one of the most unusual things that happens is in their chromosome 24, 7 to 9 million years ago, the gorillas' telomeres touch. And telomeres are the end. And that shouldn't be that way. So what do I think happened? When the 3 tectonic plates in East Africa went fucking crazy, magnetic flux went nuts. I think the gorillas got deuterated, the 2 ends touched, and then what happens? That becomes chromosome 2 in us. What makes chromosome 2 in us really weird? We have an optical bridge between POMC, EDAR, glucagon, and BCL11 2A. Why is this a big deal? This is the reason why we don't have a lot of genes difference between primates and humans. The reason why is we put an optical resonator along chromosome 2 that describes the vortex and the exhaust.
Wow.
That's what all these genes do. So think about it. What is POMC? I think everybody who listens to this will know POMC, the big story, is alpha MSH. Now, there's other stories that are important, like ACTH and gamma and beta endorphin, but that's not really the game for this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
What does the EDAR gene do? That controls sweating all over our body. What do we do with sweating? That's how we get rid of deuterium. Back in the day, that was one of the key ways we did it to make us isotopically better because we had to be better than the gorillas and the monkeys. Why? They ate a ton of fruit. They ate a heavy deuterium-laden diet.
Right.
They had 30 feet of fucking extra colon to do it through to get rid of it. Then what's the next one? The glucagon gene. The glucagon gene in us is extremely specialized because it creates 2 liters of bicarb in beta cells. What happens there?
Yeah.
We have a shortened gut by 30 feet. So the vagus nerve innervates the stomach to release acid. The acid in our stomach is like a carnivore, 1.5 pH. A gorilla is 5. So when you begin to realize, well, why do we have such a low pH? Guess what the answer is? To get rid of fucking deuterium. Because the lower your pH is, you're spitting out the deuterium in the stomach. What happens between the stomach? The chyme breaks the carbon-nitrogen bond of the meat and seafood we're designed to eat. The deuterium stays in the stomach, gets spun through the what do you call it? The mesenteric plexus through the aorta, goes into the pancreas. The bicarb mixes with that. The bicarb takes deuterium out. Where's the kinetic isotope effect in your turd? A Bristol stool number 4. That's why you don't need toilet paper. So if you need toilet paper to wipe your ass, guess what? You don't have enough deuterium going through your bicarb system. What innervates the stomach in the pancreas? The vagus nerve, the same nerve we just talked about. Then the last part of chromosome 2 that people have not put together is a regulatory unit called BCL11A. What does it do? This scales right back to Becker's work. This is some of the stuff that I discussed with Becker before he died. BCL11A changes human adult RBCs to fetal RBCs. And that is how we regenerate. So when you understand that that's there, and this links directly to what Becker found. And you remember last time I was on the podcast with you, I forget who we were on with, and I told you had made this mistake. 1 picoampere, 1 trillionth of a DC electric current takes a red blood cell and makes it go back in time to a fetal red blood cell. Guess what controls that? BCL11A.
Wow.
And it's on chromosome 2. And that's why photo repair, UV and near infrared light, is linked with deuterium depletion. You cannot photo repair if you cannot deuterium deplete. That's the point. So we are mammals that are isotopically designed to be light, not heavy. So let me tell you how the big fractal of nature, because I think you'll find this fascinating. And this is also tied to a Tool song, Lateralis. The gravity well in the center of the galaxy is deuterated and tritiated. That's what the black hole is. The spiral arm, the farther you go out, the more deuterium depleted it becomes. So guess what happened in evolutionary time? 4.6 billion years ago, we were more proximal to the gravity well than we are today. Today, the sun is further out. So I have this slide I've been showing to people. I said, look, here's where the sun was 4.6 billion years ago. Here where we are. And we're further out in the spiral arm. The further we go out from the gravity well, the more life has to be isotopically defragged. The closer that we're in, the more we're going to be locked up. So nature's telling us, even through the story of galaxies, that isotopic fractionation is the game of life. Like, you cannot be alive when you're close to a gravity well, meaning there is a certain amount of distance that has to be between you and this. Otherwise, your biology would have to work in a non-vortex way.
Wow. And is that also related to like the distance between the brain and the heart?
Yeah, see, that's why I said it to you. I wanted to see if you were thinking. Guess what? You'll find out. In all mammals, what's the big difference between gorillas and primates? They work on all fours. We're
Right.
upright. And guess what else is the difference? I told you this. They have 30,
Bipedalism. Oh, the
they
gut.
also have
Yes.
30 feet of gut. So their vagus nerve also is a disadvantage. What axis in the GPS system does the vagus nerve run with? It runs with the notochord, which is the y-axis. Where does the vagus nerve exit the head? It exits the head not through the sphenoid bone, because it can't. It exits at the jugular foramen. And the jugular foramen, why is that important? What's at the base of the jugular foramen? Where the CP angles also kick out deuterium to go back into the venous system to get back to the gravity well. How do you like that?
Wow.
And then where does the vagus go? It travels down in the carotid sheath, makes a pit stop in your voice box. Remember, monkeys don't talk. We do. That's also to help us defrag. And I don't know if you saw the study that, or the incident that happened in January, where the ISS guy had to be rescued because in space, he stopped speaking. They went and got him. The reason why, I can tell you. His foramen Alushka on the left side was blocked. He built deuterium up there. It went and broke his ear, and that's why he couldn't talk.
Wow.
And he's in Houston now, and I know they don't know what they're doing, but the way to fix him, very simply, is to put a vagal nerve stimulator in him. You know why? If you know anything about the vagus nerve, it runs differently on the left and the right side. Broca's area is on the left side of the brain. So his recurrent laryngeal nerve just needs to be stimulated. If he does that, his speech will come back. How do you like that? That's what biophysics can get you. Like, they thought he had a stroke. I'm like, no, this isn't a stroke. He just went back in time. Why? Because he went in space. He went in a place that put too much deuterium in the wrong place. So he's got a biologic atavism. He's going back in evolutionary time. And, when you actually think about how the vagus travels, I'm going to tell you the other big difference in primates and us is the angle of inclination of our aqueduct is more steep than theirs is. Why? The Venturi effect is faster. The angle of inclination of the vagus coming out of the jugular foramen straight down, it goes straight down the carotid tree. It makes a pit stop on our larynx. The left side goes around one ligament and goes into the voice box. The right side goes straight to the heart, goes to the cardiac plexus. Now you understand the heartbeat. What's the point? The heartbeat also deuterium depletes us. Okay? Distal to the heart, where does it go next? It goes through the diaphragmatic hiatus. What does breathing do? Another defrag place, because it's moving constantly up and down. And then it gets into the gut. The first place it goes in the gut is the lower esophageal sphincter. What is the lower esophageal sphincter famous for? The esophagus moves peristalsis, food down. Another place for you to defrag. You get to the stomach. What does the stomach do? It grinds the food up. It's moving around. The vagus is there again. The whole vagus nerve is an isotopic fucking factory to
Wow.
get deuterium to your beta cells. Okay. The bicarb flush, the 2 liters of bicarb you make a day. And then when you look at the vagus, where's its distal end? The distal end is at the transverse mesocolon. So that means it innervates all of your small bowel. Why is that important? Alexis, tell the audience what the small bowel does to get your poop into your colon. It's called
Peristalsis.
peristalsis. Who the people that have gastroparesis? Diabetics and who? People that
Ozempic users.
right, GLP-1 drugs. So what does that tell you? These people are net isotopic collectors. Got it? That's the reason why their faces are getting all fucked up and their fat mass is getting screwed up and they're shredding their muscle. It's exactly what happens to astronauts in space. When astronauts go to space, they lose 20% of their muscle mass. And what does NASA try to do? They give them Vasper machines to try to get them to exercise, but that's stupid because all the water in their muscles is deuterated. They're actually burning their brains when they're in space when they do that.
Wow.
Exactly. That's why I said we have everything backwards.
Yeah.
Everything is backwards when you understand the biophysics of this system. And where the vagus finally stops is where peristalsis stops. Shocker. The entire vagus nerve is designed to do the shake, rattle, and roll protocol, the volcano protocol. But what's happening on Earth and what's happening to our patients right now is exactly the same. Their exhaust is blocked and they're losing magnetic flux. And where we see that in humans is at the ATPase, the heart gravity well, and the vortex in the head.
It's incredible how the fractals come together at every layer. And I'm thinking like, so if NASA's sending these astronauts up, right, and they're making these very like fatal errors with regards to how they're managing their biology up there, it makes me wonder like how compartmentalized this information is at the highest level. Like if they're not using it for these people.
You don't understand why. I mean, this goes back to the story that we've talked about before about General Groves. Where did this idea come from?
The siloing. Yeah.
Science got siloed at the Manhattan Project. It's been siloed ever since there. It's the greatest mistake that the industrial military complex has made. They think it's an advantage, but it's really not. And if you want to know the truth, I think this is the reason why the industrial military complex, and I think the criminals in big tech are not telling us about the magnetic declination and what it means. And that's why I think, the documentary that I did with those guys for 4.5 hours, this podcast, the one that, I just did with Marty Bent, the one that I did with the 2 doctors from Louisiana, probably the ones that I'll be doing from here on in, you're going to hear me talk about the implications of all this. Like we talked about some of them today. Like I guarantee there's going to be people in your network. They're going to be like, well, I don't need to talk to you about hypothyroidism anymore because I'm good with it. But really, what does it mean? If the person just says, well, I'm going to stop my T3 and T4, but I'm not going to move, did they really get the lesson?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'll give you an example. This is a pretty harsh example, but I think it's fair to share with you. I just fired one of my long-term members from Australia. Do you know why? I got her and her husband to move here to Atami 5 years ago. They just put their house for sale and they're going back to Australia.
Oh, no.
So let me tell you what that means to me. It means I gave you all this information over 12 years and you decided to throw it in the garbage. So do you need to be a member of my tribe? No, because you're choosing to go back, as far as I'm concerned, into, a death pit. So if that's your choice, great. But I do not want you discussing anything with people that are interested in getting better. And that may be harsh, but hopefully after this podcast, you can understand why now when someone has a problem that I know how to deal with and they go completely against the grain, that not only is it bad for that person, but it's also bad for me. I cannot try to save someone who's drowning,
Hmm.
fear that they're going to pull me under with them.
Exactly.
Because this information needs to get out and it needs to get out at record levels. And then whatever you decide to do, once you put this together and you fact check Uncle Jack and you make sure that I'm not bullshitting you, you go, okay, I got the message loud and clear. Okay, how do I make this actionable? What am I going to do? I think that to me is going to be the real interesting part. Why? The last 3 or 4 months with my personal clients who I take care of, that's been a big it's been a big deal for them because now several of them thought, the issue was, 5G and 6G in their city, in Kansas, and now they're finding out no, Kansas has got the biggest magnetic declination of any part of the United States.
Yeah.
It's a big
That
deal.
gives a whole new motivation to get out.
Well, I mean, it might motivate them, Alexis, but the way people handle this, like I think the way the guys sold the thing to Alex Jones, they sensationalized it, and I think it's the wrong way to do it.
Yeah.
I think there's nothing scary about this. Why? Because this has been going on for 167 years. The real problem is the science to explain it is also published, but nobody's putting it together and making sense with our biology and then looking at animals that we came through the last extinction event with and go, like, why are they doing bad? Like, that's our canary in the coal mine. And that is information that all of us really need to pay attention to. Like, what I'm saying to you is influencers and retards on Twitter and people that are out there, that's the noise. You need to pay attention to the signal. And like doing a podcast like this, I felt it was important to do this after the Alex Jones thing because, to be honest with you, I just did that documentary thing last weekend at Costa del Sol.
Hmm.
And those guys told me it was for a documentary. They weren't going to use it anytime soon. So I thought,
Oh,
okay,
wow.
I'll let it hang loose. But now that it's come out the way it's come out, I don't want people to feel like, this is like fucking the end of the world happening 2 weeks from now. It's
Hmm.
not.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's something that's been going on. It explains all the Maha diseases, explains why people are acting like idiots in politics. It explains a lot of different things, but it also explains why allopathic and functional medicine doctors potentially can be harming you when they don't even understand the basics of how we work.
Yeah.
And I think that's why you see on Twitter, I've gotten really aggressive with some of the centralized docs, like especially in the last 2 weeks. I mean, I'm going and saying, let me repair this tweet, and I put it down. An influencer yesterday told people that using aspirin was good. You should read the tweet that I put out about aspirin. I mean, use aspirin, and where'd that idea come from? Ray Pete. Like
Yeah.
using aspirin will make you go into neurodegeneration faster than you can imagine when you're in a magnetic decline.
Mm.
It makes no sense at all. So it's that kind of low hanging fruit that we've got to fight against. We've got. I know most of the people that listen to podcasts, they don't know the science as well as we do, and they have to make judgments. Is Mark Hyman right or Jack Kruse right?
Right.
Well, that's the reason why I have to show you why Mark Hyman's a retard. It's the reason I have to show you that all the guys tied to COVID were retards. It's the reason I have to point out why certain politicians are retards. Um, because technically your life may be tethered to those decisions.
I think that's a good place to wrap it up, honestly. I think there's a lot to marinate on. Hopefully people really enjoyed this and well, enjoyed maybe not the word, but gave them really something to chew on, so to speak, pun intended. Thank you so much for your time. This was really,
Problem.
really illuminating, and I'm gonna post it today, so I'll send the links over when it's up. And yeah, thank you so much for your work and everything you're doing to help bring awareness to people and informed consent, because that really ends at the end of the day is the most important thing.
Yep, I agree.
All right. Thank you so much. Have a great
But
one.
take care.
Bye.